Pastor Snyder, is it fair or overly cynical to think of freedom, specifically the freedom of speech, as cover for disinformation, particularly with the prevalence of social media companies and foreign actors using social media companies to spread disinformation? Is there are we at an era where there needs to be some kind of policy or regulatory framework to control that? Or, I mean, how does that not get you down? Thank you.
It doesn't. And I mean, so it does, when I'm describing it, of course it does. And Road to Unfreedom was a lot about diagnosing this problem, both the foreign actors and the social media platforms. But here I'm trying to solve it, at least conceptually. And I think there is a conceptual solution. And it has to do with beginning from the person. So you said freedom of speech, which is, I think, the right formulation. But what people generally say is free speech. And I think that's where the trick begins, because once you say free speech, it's not the person anymore, it's the utterance which is free. And once you make that move, then you're in this terrain that you're describing, because 99.99999 whatever utterances that are out there are not actually directly related to a human being. They're generated by algorithms, or at least they're propagated by algorithms. Or, slightly more subtly, they're generated by a public relations company on behalf of a bank that's, whatever. And that's not an utterance that you can connect to a person. So freedom, so the way I reason it through in chapter 4 of this book, which is about factuality, is that there's no such thing as free speech. So this is generally my lexical rule in this book. The word free only belongs in front of people, and the moment you put free in front of something else, you're probably being led by the hand into some kind of tyrannical trap. And I think free speech actually, although nobody agrees with me about this yet, because everybody's attached to it as a meme, I think free speech does this, because free speech leads you into thinking, just as you say, well, I have to defend that bot who's just defamed 1 billion people, because that was speech. But who the hell cares? I mean, the bot is not going to be offended. The bot is in no danger. And that leads us back to what freedom of speech is actually for. So freedom of speech is there, from Euripides at least forward. Freedom of speech is there because it's risky to speak truth to power. That's why freedom of speech. So if you have freedom of speech, of course, you're going to protect other things. But the core function is allowing people to speak truth to power, because speaking truth to power is risky. Therefore, you protect the person who does it. Everything else is in the nimbus. Everything else is in the aureola. That's the core function of freedom of speech. It has to do with protecting a person from power. And if you remember that, that has two implications. The first is you are going to be very concerned about the dissidents. We're going to be very concerned about the non-citizens. We're going to be very concerned about the people who are actually at risk when they speak. And we're not going to care about the billionaires and the presidents and the ex-presidents, because their freedom of speech is not, in fact, threatened, right? So what's happened is that the people who actually control the entire speech environment are the ones who claim that their rights are being violated, right? Elon Musk was not able to design my dreams last night, and therefore his freedom of speech has been violated, right? Donald Trump was not able to found a social, but see, that's not freedom of speech. They already have the power. It's not about them, right? I'm not saying we should go about violating their freedom of speech in an aggressive way. I'm just saying it's not fundamentally about them. It's about the people they're crowding out. That's what it's about. So the first implication is, if it's a billionaire or an ex-president, at the first instance, don't take it seriously. They're probably abusing the term free speech. They're probably making it, as you've already suggested, making it worth less. But the second implication is that we need to be cultivating free speakers. That's what it's really all about. Cultivating free speakers, which means defending journalists, right? Making journalism profitable, defending journalists, but also means creating an educational environment so that people will know how to speak freely, which is not as easy as it sounds, like saying things which is not just repeating what everybody else says and so on. So I think the core concept should be free speakers. And the secondary concept should be freedom of speech. And if we do it that way, then we realize that these problems are problems. They're not intellectual problems. Like, it's not morally problematic to regulate a social media company. There are no free speech issues there at all. That's not problematic. This book exists because of something called copyright. That's not problematic, right? There was a time when when people invented the printing press, and there was and it just basically blew up Europe, right? A third of the population died as a result of the printing press, but eventually we got hold of it, and in social media is much the same way. We're going to have to get hold of it in some kind of a way. There's nothing wrong with regulating it, nothing wrong at all. It's not a free speech issue.